There's a specific kind of silence that settles in an open-plan office after 7 p.m. It's not peace. It's a vacuum, the ghost of 1,000 frantic keystrokes and forced pleasantries. For Lena, it was the sound of a life being meticulously managed into a gilded cage. The air, recycled and temperature-controlled, tasted of nothing. The color palette was a non-committal corporate gray. She was good at her job, exceptionally so. Her title, Senior Project Manager, was impressive, her salary comfortable, her future a clear, linear path paved by a company that valued her efficiency. By every external metric, she was a success story, the embodiment of the responsible, modern, professional. But in that humming silence, surrounded by ergonomic chairs and dormant computer screens that glowed with phantom data, she felt like a fraud. Her real life didn't begin until she swiped her access card for the last time each day, left the sterile air of the office tower, and descended into the city's authentic grit. It lived in a small rented garage bay at the edge of an industrial park, a space that always smelled of sawdust, mineral spirits, and the sharp electric tang of ozone from a welding torch. This was her sanctuary. This was where she wasn't a manager of timelines and budgets. She was just Lena. And here, she built things. Not ephemeral spreadsheets or strategic plans, but things you could touch. Things with weight and texture and soul. She was a furniture maker, a sculptor of wood and steel. The world saw her manicured hands, nails perfectly filed, tapping on a keyboard in a meeting. It didn't see those same hands at 11 p.m., calloused, stained, and marked with a fine network of tiny cuts, guiding a slab of reclaimed black walnut through a screaming table saw. Her colleagues saw her poised in a tailored blazer, discussing risk mitigation. They didn't see her in dusty overalls, a heavy welding mask hiding the fierce, absolute concentration on her face as she laid a perfect bead of molten steel to join two unforgiving edges. This wasn't a hobby. Hobbies are gentle, a pleasant diversion. This was a second, secret life. A visceral rebellion waged in stolen hours. Against the blandness of her first one, it began with a question that haunted her during a pointless 3-hour meeting about synergy. The question, insidious and persistent, was, if you died tomorrow, what would you actually leave behind? A series of well-executed project files in a forgotten cloud server. The thought was a splinter in her mind, and it festered. The garage, initially just a place to tinker, became her answer. At first, it was an escape. Then, it became a necessity, the only place she felt truly competent and alive. Finally, it became a demand. Her work, the real work, began to demand more than just her evenings and weekends. It demanded her life. The decision wasn't a dramatic movie-like scene of storming out of the office. It was a cold, calculated risk, made on a Tuesday morning, while staring at her meticulously organized savings account. It was the terrifying, echoing click of a button on a website to sign a 3-year commercial lease on a larger workshop space she couldn't yet afford. It was the silent, heart-pounding liquidation of stocks she was supposed to be saving for a down payment on a condo that now seemed like just a more luxurious cell in the same cage. It was a quiet, internal declaration of war on the comfortable, predictable, and deeply unsatisfying life everyone expected of her. The grind that followed was brutal, an exercise in sheer endurance. For a year, she lived a double life that pushed her to the edge of physical and mental collapse. Her alarm shattered the darkness at 4:30 a.m. from 5 to 8. She was in the workshop, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with sawdust. She learned the language of the wood, its tensions and grains, in those sacred, silent hours. Then, a frantic shower, and a complete transformation. She'd hide a new splinter under a bandage, and force the exhausted body of a laborer into the crisp uniform of a corporate manager. The workday was a fog she had to navigate, her mind often drifting to the complexities of a dovetail joint, or the correct amperage for a TIG weld, while someone droned on about quarterly projections. After work, there was no release. It wasn't dinner with friends or a yoga class. It was straight back to the shop, often until midnight or later, until her hands shook with fatigue and her eyes burned. Sleep was a rationed commodity. Social gatherings became a distant memory, then an impossibility. Friendships, starved of time and attention, frayed. Texts went unanswered. Birthdays were missed. "You're burning out, honey," her mother would say. Her voice laced with the loving fear of a parent who wanted safety and security for her child, above all else. "This is just a phase," a colleague remarked over lunch, seeing the perpetual fatigue smudged under her eyes. "You have such a good career. Don't throw it away." They weren't wrong. They just didn't understand. They couldn't feel the profound, soul-deep satisfaction of seeing a beautiful, functional object come to life under her own hands, a satisfaction that her six-figure salary and stock options could never, ever, buy. The setback, when it came, was not a stumble, it was a free fall. Her first big commission, a 12-foot dining table for an architect she admired deeply. She poured her entire being into it, a month of sleepless nights and painstaking labor. The design was complex, the materials exquisite. On the day of delivery, a hairline fracture she hadn't seen in the wood, stressed by the sudden change in humidity from her workshop to the client's climate-controlled home, split the tabletop with a soft, sickening crack. It was ruined. The client was kind, professional, but irrevocably disappointed. Lena felt a failure so absolute it stole her breath. She sat alone in her workshop for hours, surrounded by her expensive tools and piles of wood, the architect's polite, final email burning on her phone screen. The silence in the garage that night was a predator, worse than any office. It was the amplified sound of her own doubt, and it was deafening. It whispered that her critics were right, that she was a fool who had traded a secure, respectable future for a pile of broken wood and debt. She didn't work for a week. She went to her corporate job and moved through the motions like an automaton, a ghost in her own life. The comfort of it, the sheer numbing safety, was almost seductive enough to make her give up. She found herself browsing real estate listings for condos, just to feel the pull of that other, easier life, almost. But then, on a Friday evening, she walked back into the workshop. The smell of sawdust hit her like a memory of home. She looked at her hands, soft again, after a week away from the tools. She looked at the fractured table, a monument to her failure. But looking at it now, she saw not just an ending, but a lesson, written in grain and heartbreak. A lesson in humility, in materials, in patience. She picked up a piece of sandpaper. She started again. There was no sudden breakthrough. Success didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It arrived like a quiet, incoming tide, almost imperceptible at first. It was a local interior designer, stumbling upon her work online and commissioning a small, unassuming side table. It was that designer, upon seeing the flawless joinery up close, mentioning her to a friend. It was a feature on a small but respected design blog, written by someone who understood the language of her work. That feature led to a handful of new orders, then a slow but steady stream. Each piece she finished, each satisfied client, was another brick laid in the foundation of a new life. The day she walked into her boss's office to resign, her heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange, calm certainty. Her boss, a good man trapped in his own gilded cage, was confused. He offered her more money, a promotion. He couldn't comprehend why she would trade a clear path for an open wilderness. She simply smiled, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked away. It was the most terrifying and the most honest thing she had ever done. Now her life is in the workshop. The air is always thick with a fine coat of dust, and she is almost always tired. Financial anxiety is a constant, low-level hum in the back of her mind. But the silence here is different. It's a productive, living silence, filled with the presence of her work, with the promise of what her hands will create next. It's the silence of focus, not of emptiness. Sometimes late at night, she stands in the middle of the floor, surrounded by the dark, solid shapes of finished and half-finished pieces. She runs a hand over a perfectly sanded curve, feels the cool, solid strength of a steel joint she welded herself. She is not a manager of projects anymore. Furthermore, she is the architect of her own life, and in the quiet, dusty, authentic reality she has built with her own two hands, she is finally, completely home.